Shoigu has arrived in North Korea for high-level talks, according to Russian state media.
Hope for peace in the Ukrainian war is fading. The 30-day ceasefire deal brokered by Donald Trump has failed. Violence is now escalating both on the front lines and in cross-border attacks. These conflicts are taking a heavy toll on the Russian military. Every day, an average of 1,000 Russian soldiers are neutralized on the Ukrainian battlefields, and total Russian casualties exceed 900,000. But even this terrible toll is not enough to make Vladimir Putin back down. On the contrary, the Kremlin is looking for new ways to feed its war machine. Once again, Putin's destination is North Korea. Previously, Kim Jong-un had sent 12,000 troops to Russia. However, these troops also suffered heavy losses in Ukraine. More than 4,000 North Korean soldiers were destroyed on the battlefield. Even Donald Trump has made it clear that most of the North Korean troops have been eliminated. But things do not end there. Russia is now once again turning to Pyongyang in the hope of more troops. Russian Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu travelled to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong-un. Shoigu may adopt a strategy of begging Kim Jong-un for more troops. This meeting reveals Moscow's military desperation. But will North Korea send new troops to Russia? Will Vladimir Putin be able to compensate for these huge losses on the battlefield? As critical developments that could change the course of the Ukraine war unfold, we keep our finger on the pulse of the agenda. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay up to date with our content. Russia and North Korea are deepening their military cooperation as Russia continues its invasion of Ukraine. In this context, Russian Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu travelled to Pyongyang. Shoigu arrived in the DPRK capital in an Ilyushin Il-96-300 around 0940 KST. A video posted on social networks shows Shoigu getting off his plane in Pyongyang. According to Russian state media, Shoigu's meeting with Kim lasted more than 2 hours. They discussed the results of Putin and Kim's state visits in 2023 and 2024, as well as other security issues such as the recently launched Russia-US dialogue, everything that is happening in Ukraine, and the situation on the Korean peninsula. During his visit, Shoigu is believed to have discussed Pyongyang's provision of troops and artillery to Russia, and Moscow's provision of military technical assistance in return. Shoigu told Kim that the Russian leader pays the greatest attention to the implementation of the agreements reached with the North Korean leader. As you may recall, the two leaders signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement last year, and Shoigu's remarks were a reference to this agreement. Under this agreement, Russia is once again asking North Korea for troop support. North Korea is reportedly favourable to this offer. North Korea is thought to be in the process of deploying an additional 1,000–3,000 troops to the Ukrainian conflict to support Russian forces. These numbers are suspiciously close to the reported casualty toll of the 12,000 North Korean Special Operations Forces soldiers deployed so far in the conflict. According to press sources quoting South Korea's National Intelligence Service, the North Koreans had about 300 dead and 3,700 wounded as of January. These figures seem small compared to the 2,000 dead a week reported by the Russians. Of course, the North Koreans have far fewer troops in the conflict. Therefore, the new troops planned to be sent to Russia could be the ones to replace the losses suffered by the North Koreans so far. Reportedly, in 2022, North Korea has offered 100,000 troops to support the fighting. At the moment, this seems unlikely to materialize, but the North Koreans have contributed to the Russian war machine in much more significant ways, both in terms of generosity and lethality. The number of troops North Korea has sent to Russia for war is not small. In fact, compared to other troop deployments, such as North Korean SOF sent to places like Angola, Mozambique, DR Congo, Ethiopia, and, most recently, Syria, this deployment has been much more significant in terms of numbers, but it may be shorter in terms of time. The North Korean troops sent to Russia are reportedly the best trained, best fed, and best equipped troops Pyongyang can send. Yet, because of their relatively small personnel numbers, they make a small and insignificant contribution to the overall and significant part of the war effort that North Korea is contributing. Another important element to consider is the cry of many experts that the North Koreans are simply being used as cannon fodder. While the North Korean special forces have suffered heavy casualties, it is certainly no more or at a higher rate than their counterparts in the Russian military. So what are North Korea's other contributions to Russia's war against Ukraine? The numbers are actually quite staggering. Until January 2024, the list of weapons transferred by North Korea to Russia included short-range ballistic missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, and anti-tank missiles, as well as various types of artillery. North Korea has so far transferred rifles, rocket launchers, rockets, mortars, and shells, as well as a large amount of ammunition. In fact, by February 2024, the US State Department reported that North Korea had exported more than 10,000 container loads of ammunition or ammunition-related material to Russia. This contribution was an enormous and unprecedented number. Military arms analyst Joost Olymans noted at the time that these deliveries reportedly consisted primarily of 120mm mortars, 122mm and 152mm artillery shells, and 122mm rockets. Shipments continued in 2024, and the volume of weapons did not slow down. In fact, in 2024, the North Koreans added long-range 100mm self-propelled guns, 240mm multiple rocket launchers, and bullseye anti-tank guided missile systems to the mix, while continuing to supply SRBMs and heavy artillery at a high and steady rate. By early 2025, it was widely assessed that North Korea had shipped some 20,000 containers containing military systems and ammunition to Russia. And, remarkably, North Korea is reportedly responsible for more than 50% of the munitions used by the Russians in this war, and about a third of the ballistic missiles used. According to press reports, by early 2025, North Korea had profited more than $6 billion from military expansion into Russia. The proliferation includes many conventional weapon systems and hundreds of ballistic missiles. This activity and proliferation of systems from North Korea, which are essentially copies of the systems Pyongyang received from Russia, can be confusing. One is inclined to ask why. The answer lies in the way the Russian military operates. Unlike American or NATO forces, which try to use precision targeting, the Russian military is a sharp tool. Therefore, this campaign consisted of Russia firing millions of artillery shells, thousands of missiles, and many other conventional systems at its disposal. Moscow does not have the resources to pump ammunition into Ukrainian military units, cities and towns at the current pace without being supplied by external entities. Since North Korea's systems are essentially copies of old Soviet or Russian systems, their compatibility and fairly rapid incorporation into combat is a relatively easy task for the Russian military. Still, North Korea's overall contribution to the war in Ukraine cannot be called anything other than a game changer. In a war dominated by artillery and rockets, when one state supplies more than half of the ammunition to another state, its inclusion in that state's military supply system is, of course, a game changer. North Korea is just that. It is important for the North Korean government to realize that SOF units are simply a weapon system to be proliferated, like Koksan 170mm artillery or bullseye ATGMs. The bigger picture is the money generated by proliferation and the ability for the Kim regime to maintain and pursue its core objectives. What will this mean in the long run? North Korea currently receives assistance from Russia in many of its military programs. Pyongyang also receives more food, money and fuel from Russia than at any time since the end of the Cold War. So the question now arises, how will all this play out once the war with Ukraine is over and Russia no longer needs North Korea's weapons? Only time will tell. Therefore, it is in North Korea's interest to prolong this war as long as possible. On the other side of the coin is the United States. Donald Trump is increasing his contacts with Russia and is pressuring Ukraine to come to the negotiating table. But Kim Jong-un reminds Trump that he still has unfinished business. Kim Jong-un's latest cruise missile test was the second since President Donald Trump took office in January, reminding the administration that despite conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, The United States and North Korea have unfinished business. Indeed, Trump has expressed on several occasions his desire to revive dialogue and negotiations with Pyongyang. In a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba earlier this month, he expressed confidence in having good relations with North Korea and praised his relationship with Kim. Trump has shown that his willingness to engage with North Korea is not just talk. He has brought back many key officials and experienced negotiators who were heavily involved in summit diplomacy with North Korea during his first term, and placed them in even more influential positions. Alex Wong, who previously served at the State Department and now serves as Deputy National Security Advisor in the White House, and Alison Hooker, who served as Deputy Undersecretary for Political Affairs at the State Department and previously served as Senior Asia Policy Advisor at the National Security Council, led working-level negotiations for Trump's two summits with Kim Jong-un in 2018 and 2019. Kevin Kim, Deputy Assistant Secretary for East Asian Affairs at the State Department, helped shape those negotiations when he was Chief of Staff to former U.S. Special Envoy to North Korea, Stephen Biegun. Bo Harrison, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at the White House, was also known to be a key planner of the Trump-Kim summits. Trump's diplomatic intentions appear serious and are indeed a welcome sign given the precarious situation Washington, Seoul, and their regional allies face in dealing with North Korea's growing nuclear threats. Since the collapse of the second summit in 2019, Pyongyang has conducted more missile tests than in the previous decade, while also unveiling a range of new weapons. As the ever more ambitious tests and muscle flexes show, North Korea's nuclear program has grown rapidly in recent years. Meanwhile, North Korea has also significantly expanded its military and strategic ties with Russia. The evolving cooperative partnerships have chilling implications for North Korea's nuclear threats. Pyongyang could gain access to Moscow's advanced missile and nuclear technology. To date, no conclusive evidence has emerged that Russia has transferred any of its technology to North Korea, but the possibility is alarming enough on its own. In light of North Korea's overall acceleration in nuclear armament and the intensifying threats between North Korea and US South Korean forces on the Korean peninsula, Washington and Seoul have lost even basic lines of communication for crisis management with Pyongyang. This has inadvertently increased the risks of escalation and conflict. Unfortunately, the Biden administration failed to